Steve Harvey had hosted Family Feud for over 15 years, guiding thousands of families through moments of competition, laughter, and occasional unexpected developments on his stage. Throughout his extensive career in television, he had witnessed the complete spectrum of human behavior and family dynamics, from heartwarming demonstrations of love and unity to uncomfortable revelations of tension and conflict that sometimes surfaced under the pressure of public performance. However, nothing in his considerable experience could have prepared him for what would unfold on that June afternoon in 2024, when a husband's inappropriate behavior toward a female contestant would cross every line of acceptable conduct and trigger an immediate and unprecedented response from Steve that would result in the first time in the show's history that a contestant was physically removed from the stage mid-taping for conduct violations. The Carter family from Dallas, Texas, stood ready to compete against the Rodriguez family from San Antonio, Texas, both families having traveled to Los Angeles excited about their opportunity to participate in America's most beloved game show. Yet beneath the surface of what should have been a fun family experience, a pattern of disrespect and inappropriate behavior was about to manifest in such an egregious way that it would stop production immediately and demonstrate that some actions have swift and non-negotiable consequences regardless of the setting in which they occur. If you value stories that remind us of the importance of respect, appropriate boundaries, and the courage required to confront unacceptable behavior immediately and decisively, please take a moment to engage with this content by hitting the like button and subscribing to our channel for more powerful narratives about maintaining standards of decency and respect in all circumstances. Ryan and Michelle Carter had been married for 11 years, though the quality and character of those years would become tragically apparent through what was about to transpire on national television. Ryan was 38 years old, a successful commercial real estate broker whose career had provided substantial financial comfort for his family. He carried himself with excessive confidence that crossed into arrogance, his expensive clothing and polished appearance reflecting someone who placed high value on image and impression management. Michelle, 35, had spent the past 9 years as a full-time homemaker after leaving her position as a graphic designer when their first child was born, dedicating herself to raising their 2 children and managing the household that enabled Ryan's demanding career. Their children completed the family lineup on the Family Feud stage. 9-year-old Ethan displayed the careful composure of a child who had learned to navigate complex adult dynamics and moderate his behavior based on his father's moods. 6-year-old Lily held her mother's hand with visible anxiety about being on television, her young face reflecting tension that seemed excessive for what should have been an exciting family adventure. Ryan's sister Nicole, 32, rounded out the 5-person team, included in the Family Feud appearance at Michelle's insistence, as a way to provide some family support and perhaps to dilute the one-on-one dynamics between Ryan and Michelle that had become increasingly uncomfortable and difficult in recent years. What made the Carter family situation particularly troubling was not a single dramatic crisis, but rather a pattern of behavior from Ryan that had eroded the foundation of respect and partnership that should have characterized their marriage. Over the 11 years they had been together, Ryan had developed an increasingly problematic approach to interactions with other women, one that crossed boundaries of appropriate behavior and demonstrated profound disrespect for Michelle and their marriage commitment. Ryan engaged in what he characterized as harmless flirting with women he encountered in professional and social settings, making comments about their appearance, seeking opportunities for physical contact through unnecessary touches on arms or shoulders, and creating situations where he could interact with attractive women in ways that made both the women and Michelle uncomfortable. When Michelle confronted Ryan about this behavior, he would dismiss her concerns as jealousy or insecurity, suggesting that she was overreacting to innocent friendliness and that her discomfort reflected her own issues rather than any actual problem with his conduct. He would accuse her of being controlling or trying to limit his social interactions, framing her legitimate concerns about appropriate boundaries as unreasonable restrictions on his ability to be personable and engaging in professional and social contexts. This pattern of behavior, followed by dismissal and blame shifting, had left Michelle feeling increasingly isolated and uncertain about whether her perceptions were accurate or whether she was indeed being overly sensitive about interactions that Ryan insisted were completely innocent and appropriate. The reality which Michelle had begun to recognize with increasing clarity, was that Ryan's behavior was neither innocent nor appropriate. He was engaging in consistent boundary violations that communicated disrespect for Michelle and for the women he targeted with his unwanted attention. His flirtation was not reciprocated or welcomed, but rather tolerated by women who felt uncomfortable rejecting his advances directly, particularly in professional settings where Ryan held positions of power or influence that made direct confrontation risky or awkward. Michelle had received reports from friends and acquaintances who had witnessed Ryan's behavior at social events, describing incidents where he had made other women visibly uncomfortable with excessive attention or inappropriate comments about their appearance or attractiveness. Michelle had reached a point where she was seriously questioning whether to remain in the marriage, recognizing that Ryan's pattern of disrespecting boundaries and dismissing her concerns represented a fundamental character issue rather than a minor quirk or harmless personality trait. She had suggested marriage counseling multiple times, hoping that a professional third party might help Ryan recognize the problematic nature of his behavior and its impact on their relationship. Ryan had refused each time, insisting that there was no problem with his behavior and that Michelle simply needed to become less insecure and more trusting of his judgment and intentions. The Family Feud appearance had been arranged through Ryan's business connections, an opportunity he had pursued primarily for the visibility and networking potential it might provide rather than genuine interest in creating a positive family memory. Michelle had agreed to participate with significant reluctance, concerned about how Ryan might behave on camera and whether his pattern of inappropriate interaction with women might manifest in this very public setting. Her concerns proved to be entirely justified in ways that exceeded even her worst expectations about what might occur during the taping. The game began with standard Family Feud energy and production quality, Steve Harvey engaging both families with his characteristic warmth and humor. The Rodriguez family presented as genuinely warm and connected, their interactions with each other demonstrating authentic affection and mutual support. The family included Miguel and Carmen Rodriguez, married for 23 years, along with their 3 children and Carmen's mother, creating a multi-generational team that radiated positive energy and genuine enjoyment of the shared experience. Carmen Rodriguez was a particularly striking presence on the stage, a 44-year-old woman whose natural beauty and warm personality created immediate positive impression with the studio audience and production crew. She was gracious and enthusiastic in her interactions, displaying intelligence and quick wit in her answers while also supporting and encouraging her family members with genuine warmth and generosity of spirit. She carried herself with confidence and poise that came from inner security rather than need for external validation, her comfort in her own skin evident in every interaction and response. From the moment the game began, Ryan Carter's attention became inappropriately focused on Carmen Rodriguez in ways that were immediately noticeable to Michelle, to Nicole, and increasingly to the production crew and studio audience, as his behavior escalated beyond what could be dismissed as normal competition dynamics or friendly inter-family banter. Ryan stared at Carmen with intensity that went far beyond casual observation, his eyes tracking her movements around the Rodriguez family podium in ways that were obvious and uncomfortable. When Carmen would celebrate correct answers with her family members, Ryan would watch her with visible appreciation that had nothing to do with gameplay and everything to do with inappropriate personal interest. The situation escalated during a break in taping when contestants were given a few minutes to relax while production crew adjusted lighting and camera positions. Ryan approached the Rodriguez family podium, ostensibly to engage in friendly conversation with the competing family, but actually to create opportunity for direct interaction with Carmen. He positioned himself close to her in a way that invaded her personal space, leaning in unnecessarily when speaking and finding excuses to make physical contact through light touches on her arm or shoulder that were clearly unwelcome based on Carmen's body language and subtle attempts to create distance. Ryan began making comments to Carmen that crossed every line of appropriate conduct, complimenting her appearance in ways that were far too personal and detailed for interaction between strangers in a public setting. He told her she was beautiful, that she looked incredible, that her husband was a lucky man. He asked her inappropriate questions about her background and personal life that had nothing to do with the game show experience and everything to do with his obvious interest in her, as an object of attraction, rather than as a fellow contestant deserving of basic respect and appropriate boundaries. Carmen responded to Ryan's attention with polite but firm attempts to redirect the conversation and establish boundaries, making clear through both her words and body language that his comments and proximity were unwelcome and inappropriate. However, Ryan appeared either oblivious to or unconcerned by Carmen's discomfort, continuing to pursue interaction despite clear signals that his attention was not reciprocated or appreciated. Miguel Rodriguez observed this exchange with growing anger and protective instinct toward his wife, moving closer to Carmen and positioning himself physically between her and Ryan in a clear signal that Ryan's behavior needed to stop immediately. Michelle Carter watched this entire interaction from the Carter family podium with visible distress and humiliation, recognizing the familiar pattern of Ryan's inappropriate behavior now manifesting in perhaps the most public setting possible. She could see Carmen's discomfort, Miguel's anger, and the growing awareness among the production crew and studio audience that something problematic was occurring during what should have been a routine break in taping. Nicole placed a supportive hand on Michelle's shoulder, her expression reflecting both sympathy for her sister-in-law and anger at her brother's inexcusable conduct. Steve Harvey had been consulting with producers about the next segment when he became aware of the interaction occurring between Ryan and Carmen. As he turned his attention to what was happening, he immediately recognized the inappropriate nature of Ryan's behavior and the discomfort it was causing Carmen and her family. Steve's expression transformed from casual professionalism to serious concern, and then to controlled anger as he observed Ryan continuing to make comments and attempt physical contact, despite Carmen's obvious attempts to disengage and create distance. Steve Harvey made an immediate decision to intervene directly and decisively, recognizing that what he was witnessing required swift action rather than private conversation or gentle redirection. He approached Ryan with purposeful stride, his body language communicating authority and displeasure in ways that made clear this was not going to be a friendly conversation or minor correction. The studio fell quiet as everyone present recognized that something serious was occurring and that Steve Harvey was about to address it in real time rather than waiting for a more private opportunity. Steve positioned himself directly in front of Ryan, blocking his access to Carmen and the Rodriguez family while commanding his complete attention. When Steve spoke, his voice carried none of its usual warmth or humor, instead reflecting controlled fury and absolute moral clarity about what he had just witnessed and what was about to happen as a consequence. Steve told Ryan in terms that were unmistakable and non-negotiable that his behavior toward Carmen Rodriguez was completely unacceptable and would not be tolerated for another second on this stage or anywhere else associated with Family Feud production. Steve articulated specifically what Ryan had done wrong, ensuring there could be no confusion or attempt to minimize or reframe the situation. He described how Ryan had invaded Carmen's personal space, made inappropriate comments about her appearance, engaged in unwelcome physical contact, and persisted in this behavior despite clear signals that his attention was unwanted and inappropriate. Steve made absolutely clear that this conduct constituted harassment, that it demonstrated profound disrespect for Carmen as a human being entitled to participate in the game show experience without being subjected to unwanted sexual attention, and that it showed contempt for Michelle and the marriage vows that Ryan had apparently forgotten or chosen to disregard. Ryan attempted to respond with his familiar pattern of dismissal and minimization, suggesting that Steve was overreacting to friendly conversation and innocent compliments, that he had meant no harm, and that everyone was being overly sensitive about normal social interaction. This attempt to reframe and deflect only intensified Steve's response, as he made clear that Ryan's characterization of his behavior as innocent or acceptable demonstrated either profound lack of self-awareness or deliberate disrespect for basic standards of appropriate conduct between adults in professional settings. Steve turned briefly to address Carmen directly, apologizing on behalf of the show for the fact that she had been subjected to harassment and inappropriate behavior while participating in what should have been an enjoyable family experience. He assured her that Ryan's conduct was not acceptable or normal, that her obvious discomfort and attempts to establish boundaries had been completely appropriate and justified, and that she should not have been placed in the position of having to manage unwanted attention from another contestant during the taping. Carmen nodded with appreciation for Steve's acknowledgement and intervention, clearly relieved that the situation was being taken seriously and addressed directly rather than being dismissed or minimized. Steve then made a decision that was unprecedented in Family Feud history, but that he later described as absolutely necessary given the severity of Ryan's conduct and the need to demonstrate that certain behaviors would result in immediate consequences regardless of the disruption to production or the awkwardness of the situation. Steve told Ryan directly and unambiguously that he was being removed from the taping immediately, that he was no longer welcome on the Family Feud stage, and that security would be escorting him from the studio. Steve made clear that this was not a temporary timeout or an opportunity for Ryan to apologize and return, but rather a permanent removal based on conduct that violated basic standards of respect and appropriate behavior. Ryan appeared genuinely shocked by this consequence, apparently having believed that his behavior would be tolerated or at worst privately addressed with a gentle suggestion to moderate his conduct. He attempted to argue, suggesting that being removed from the show was an excessive response to what he still characterized as innocent friendliness. Steve cut off this protest immediately, his voice carrying absolute finality as he stated that the decision was made and not subject to negotiation or discussion. Security personnel approached, and Steve instructed them to escort Ryan from the building immediately. The studio audience watched this unfold in stunned silence, many appearing supportive of Steve's decision, while others seemed shocked by the dramatic nature of the intervention and removal. Michelle Carter stood at the family podium with tears streaming down her face, her expression reflecting a complex mixture of humiliation at her husband's public behavior, relief that someone had finally confronted him directly about his pattern of inappropriate conduct, and uncertainty about what this meant for their marriage and family moving forward. Steve approached Michelle with compassion and concern, recognizing that she was experiencing profound distress and that his decision to remove Ryan, while necessary and appropriate, had created immediate crisis for her and her children. He spoke with her privately for several minutes, acknowledging the impossible position she had been placed in by her husband's behavior and offering support and resources for dealing with the aftermath of such a public confrontation and removal. Steve made clear that the decision to remove Ryan was based solely on Ryan's conduct and its impact on Carmen, not on any desire to punish or humiliate Michelle, who had done nothing wrong and was herself a victim of Ryan's disrespect and boundary violations. Michelle made a decision in that moment that demonstrated remarkable strength and clarity despite the emotional turmoil she was experiencing. She told Steve that she wanted to continue with the taping, that she and Nicole and the children would complete the game as a 4-person team representing the Carter family. She explained that Ryan's removal, while shocking and painful, was a consequence of his own choices and behavior, and that she would not allow his conduct to deprive her children of the Family Feud experience they had been excited about for months. She also quietly acknowledged to Steve that this public confrontation of Ryan's inappropriate behavior had clarified something for her about her marriage and the changes that needed to occur moving forward. The game resumed with the Carter family now consisting of Michelle, Nicole, Ethan, and Lily, competing as a 4-person team against the full Rodriguez family. The atmosphere had shifted dramatically from lighthearted competition to something more serious and emotionally charged, but both families demonstrated grace and determination to complete the experience despite the disruption and discomfort of what had occurred. The Rodriguez family treated the Carter family with kindness and respect, making no comments about Ryan's behavior or his removal, simply focusing on the game and supporting their own family members while also showing compassion for Michelle and her children, who were clearly navigating a difficult situation with as much dignity as they could maintain. The Carter family ultimately lost the game to the Rodriguez family, though the outcome felt secondary to the more significant events that had transpired during the taping. When filming concluded, Steve spent considerable time with both families, ensuring that Carmen and the Rodriguez family felt supported and validated in their response to Ryan's inappropriate behavior, and that Michelle and her children had access to resources and support for processing what had occurred and determining next steps for their family and their relationship with Ryan. Steve made clear to the production team that the episode would not air in any form, that what had occurred was not entertainment, but rather a serious incident of harassment that had required immediate intervention, and that should not be broadcast for public consumption. However, he did address the incident in general terms during a later episode, discussing the importance of appropriate boundaries, the reality that harassment could occur in any setting, including supposedly fun and lighthearted environments like game shows, and the responsibility that everyone had to intervene immediately and decisively when witnessing behavior that crossed lines of acceptable conduct. The immediate aftermath of the incident was difficult and painful for Michelle and her children. Ryan was furious about being removed from the show and attempted to blame Michelle for his removal, suggesting that if she had not been so obviously uncomfortable with his behavior, then Steve would not have felt compelled to intervene so dramatically. This response demonstrated to Michelle with absolute clarity that Ryan had learned nothing from the experience and was not capable of or willing to acknowledge the problematic nature of his conduct or take responsibility for the consequences his behavior had created. Michelle made the decision to separate from Ryan within 2 weeks of the Family Feud incident, recognizing that his pattern of inappropriate behavior toward other women combined with his refusal to acknowledge wrongdoing or seek help represented fundamental character issues that were unlikely to change without consequences more serious than public embarrassment or temporary removal from a game show. She filed for divorce 3 months later, citing Ryan's pattern of disrespect and boundary violations as irreconcilable differences that made continuation of the marriage untenable and damaging to both herself and their children. The divorce proceedings were contentious, with Ryan attempting to use the Family Feud incident against Michelle by suggesting that her public humiliation of him by continuing the show after his removal demonstrated her lack of commitment to the marriage and her willingness to prioritize public image over family unity. The court and Michelle's attorney rejected this characterization completely, making clear that Ryan's removal had been a consequence of his own conduct rather than any action by Michelle, and that her decision to complete the taping demonstrated strength and appropriate boundary setting rather than any failure of marital commitment. 1 year after the incident, Michelle had established a new life for herself and her children, one characterized by peace and stability that had been absent during her marriage to Ryan. She had returned to work as a graphic designer, rebuilding the professional identity and financial independence she had sacrificed when she became a full-time homemaker. She had established clear boundaries with Ryan regarding co-parenting that limited his ability to manipulate or undermine her, while ensuring he maintained appropriate relationship with their children. She had begun therapy to process the years of gaslighting and boundary violations she had experienced in her marriage, developing stronger sense of her own judgment and entitlement to expect respectful treatment in all relationships. Steve Harvey maintained periodic contact with Michelle, checking in on her well-being and her children's adjustment to the family changes. He expressed consistent support for her decision to leave the marriage, validating her recognition that Ryan's pattern of behavior represented character issues that were unlikely to change without consequences far more serious than those he had experienced. Steve spoke about the incident in interviews as an example of why boundaries and immediate consequences mattered, why witnessing harassment required intervention rather than polite silence, and why protecting people from inappropriate behavior was more important than maintaining comfort or avoiding disruption to planned activities. The incident became part of internal training for Family Feud production staff about recognizing and responding to inappropriate behavior during tapings, ensuring that future situations involving harassment or boundary violations would be addressed swiftly and appropriately. The show implemented clearer policies about contestant conduct expectations and consequences for violations, making explicit what had previously been assumed about basic standards of respectful behavior during tapings. For Carmen Rodriguez and her family, the incident was unfortunate but ultimately resolved in ways that validated their response and demonstrated that speaking up about uncomfortable behavior was appropriate and necessary. Carmen appreciated Steve's immediate intervention and his public validation that Ryan's behavior had been inappropriate and unacceptable rather than something she should have tolerated or minimized. Miguel expressed gratitude that his protective instinct toward his wife had been supported, rather than characterized as overreaction or excessive concern. If this story has reinforced your understanding that harassment is never acceptable regardless of setting, that immediate intervention is required when witnessing inappropriate behavior, and that maintaining boundaries and standards of respect is more important than avoiding disruption or discomfort. Please take a moment to like this content and subscribe to our channel for more narratives about families demonstrating courage in confronting unacceptable conduct and supporting those who experience violations of basic respect and dignity.